be inducted in the East Tennessee Business Hall of Fame on April 9th, 2015, and we are so proud of her. They have stated in here that, if I can read this, Minda is known for both her role in serving on several community boards and for being a first in East Tennessee that opened doors for other women to follow in business because of her leadership of an organization that provides service to more than 445,000 customers. So we want to extend our congratulations.
Thank you.
And we knew that you were a Hall of Famer before they actually were.
We're glad to bring us the new one.
Okay.
You'll have to work on your script writer for the future.
This is the first time I'm going off script, so watch out.
Thank you very much.
Does anybody else want to say anything? Okay. We can go ahead and call the board meeting to order and have a roll call.
Okay, Madam Chair, I see that all are present except for Commissioner Pennell.
Everyone should have gotten a copy of the minutes. If so, could I have approval?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? We'll go to Resolution 1326, requesting of the Council of the City of Knoxville Knoxville, Tennessee, to provide for the issuance of a couple of bond issues.
Perfect. Commissioners, I'll remind you that we did discuss this briefly last month, but I'll recognize Jamie Davis to give you the details on the bond issues.
Afternoon, Commissioners. As Ms. Roach said, presented for your consideration today is Resolution 1326, which requests your approval for KUB to issue electric, water, and wastewater revenue bonds. And these bonds were part of our financial plan from last year, and we initially thought that we would issue them this fall, but market conditions have presented themselves as such that we believe pulling them forward in schedule is a good thing. And as we have been constructing our financial plans, which we'll go over with you next month, these bonds are still needed to help fund our capital improvements. So as we take a look at where the market is right now, we don't ever want to time the market as to when we issue bonds, but as you can see, where the market is right now presents a 50-year low. And so anytime we can take advantage of market conditions like that, that helps us manage our debt service costs, which ultimately help our customers. So what we propose to do is issue $95 million in revenue bonds for our electric, water, and wastewater divisions, $45 million in electric, $20 million in water, $30 million in wastewater. And we'll use those proceeds to fund our capital programs with Century 2 and even some of the first phases of the strategic initiatives that you all have been hearing about in the past few months. As with all of our debt, City Council's authorization is required, and once we receive your consideration today, we'll seek to be put on the City Council's agenda and get their approval as well. Once that has been obtained, we hope to sell these bonds in late April, maybe early May, depending on the timing of the schedule. So as we take a look at each individual division's particulars, again, $45 million for electric. The projected interest cost for those bonds is right at 3.5%, which would yield about $28.7 million in interest costs. You can see the impact of the proposed issues in the chart on the right, and this is the total division's debt service, with the red being our existing obligations and the green being the impact of the new proposed bonds. Now, all of the issues are issued in accordance with KUB's debt management policy that the board has approved, and as such, these maturities extend to 2045 or 30-year issues. The debt ratio for the division after issuance would be 39%, and within the first 10 years of the plan here, 46% of the debt will be paid in the particular division. As we forward to water, $20 million, again about 3.5% interest projected there, with $12.5 million of interest cost. The chart on the right showing the impact of the new issue to debt service there, the blue being our existing obligations, green being the newly proposed bonds. These maturities are also 30 years, so 2045 will be the last maturity there. After the issue, the debt ratio of the division would be 45%, and we would repay approximately 35% of the entire division's obligation within 10 years. And then finally, wastewater, $30 million, interest rate there 3.75%. $23.8 million in interest. The maturity is a little bit different here, a little bit longer, 35-year maturities. Those will extend to 2050. The chart, you can see the orange representing our existing obligations, the green, the impact of the new. After the issue, our debt ratio in that division will be approximately 64%, and we'll repay 25% of those bonds within the first 10 years. As far as issuance costs, again, total cost for this particular issue, right around $386,000, with the bulk of that going to our financial advisor, Cumberland Securities, our bond counsel, Bassberry and Sims, and costs to get these bonds rated with Moody's and Standard & Poor's. And I know we actually have our ratings call tomorrow on both the refunding that we presented last month and these bonds as well too. So again, a total issuance cost of $386,000. So again, for your consideration is Resolution 1326, which requests City Council authorization to issue these bonds for our electric, water, and wastewater divisions. The resolution before you today for your consideration contains all those provisions that the council resolution does as well. And that provides for their authorization collectively of $95 million in revenue bonds. Those bonds are secured by each system's revenues, and the resolution also provides for that final maturity date, as well as the purpose of these bonds, which is, again, to fund our system capital improvements. So I'll be glad to answer any questions.
I have a question. Given the information that we're getting from the Fed with regard to interest rates potentially escalating, do we anticipate that we would need to issue any other bonds this year?
No, we don't think that the market will turn fast enough in order to do that. And we, in our financial plans in the outer years, and again, we can talk a little bit about that next month, we've allowed for a little bit of that to creep back in. But it's hard to know when the Fed will again send that signal. A little bit of a mixed signal yesterday, so it's hard to interpret what very well may happen. But maybe all the more reason to issue now is to take advantage of those historically low rates.
Yeah, we usually are in the fall, isn't that?
We typically do it in the fall because most of this will fund our capital improvements for next fiscal year, a little bit at the end of this fiscal year. So we typically do it in late summer. But we felt, as Jamie said, with the attractiveness of the rates, let's move it up and take advantage of that before in the event that they do begin to rise. But these bonds will fund most of our capital for next year. So even if we wanted to, we really don't have the flexibility to issue any additional debt because you have to draw it down within a defined period of time under IRS arbitrage rules.
Okay.
Any more discussion? Questions? I request a motion and a second.
Second.
Any more discussion? After, is there a visitor here that needs to speak? Do you have any visitors? Mr. Coley, would you please call roll?
Commissioner Anderson?
Aye.
Commissioner Hamilton?
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert?
Aye.
Commissioner Thompson?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams? Commissioner Worden? Aye. Resolution 1326 is passed.
For the president's report.
Commissioners, I'll remind you over the last several months, we've been having system reports. In the fall, we had our wastewater report, and in January, we had the report on the natural gas system. Today, we have a two-part presentation. We have water. Julie Childers will present the water system report, and then Mike Patterson will do the electric system report. I'll go ahead and introduce both of those, and when Julie finishes, Mike can come forward. But before Julie finishes, she will also include an update on the Cumberland Avenue project, which I'm sure all of you heard a lot about. So, Julie?
Good afternoon. I do have three main topics I'd like to cover today. First of all is an update on our Century 2 programs, our water main replacement programs for both galvanized and cast iron main. Secondly, we'll talk about our initiative for water loss, and then as Ms. Roach mentioned, we'll talk about the Cumberland Avenue project for a few minutes. This is the model we've been using for several years on water main replacement. The main goal was to increase our main replacement to a rate of about 1% of our system a year, which we have done. The other goal was to remove galvanized from our system by the year 2020, and we're on track for that. There's also a long-range program for cast iron, which continues on into the future for several decades. As part of that, we have a critical mains program, which is shown here at the bottom, which extends on to the year 2030. And that was to replace some of our older, larger diameter cast iron mains a little earlier in the program. This shows where we are with our galvanized main program. We started out in 2001 at about 150 miles. Right now, at the end of 2014, we're down to 67 miles in the system. And we're on track to complete this program by the year 2020, continuing on at the rate of about 12 miles per year. For cast iron, of course, it's a much longer range program, extending on for several decades. We started in 2006 with around 300 miles, and right now we're down to 270, and that will continue at the 5 miles per year. The critical metals, when we first looked at that in 2006, we were at 19 miles. We're now down to 14, and that's on schedule to be completed by the year 2030.
And what's the definition of critical mains?
Those were our older critical mains, were older than 1940 and larger, 12 inches and up. And the reason we picked that is because, of course, the larger diameters serve more customers, and if there's a failure on those, they affect a lot more customers. But sometimes it's easy to lose sight of the fact that when we're making incremental investments every year, that it really does make a good impact on our system. When we first started talking about water main replacement acceleration was in 2006. At that point, we had about 1,400 miles, half of which was made up of the older types of pipe. And that includes the cement, the cast iron, and the galvanized pipe. At the end of 2014, we had already removed 100 miles of those older types of pipe. And so we're on track in the next 6 years, by the year 2020, to actually remove another 100 miles from the system. So this just goes to show that our approach of investing a certain amount of investment each year does yield long-term results. And we're beginning to see that already. Another item within Century 2 is also water loss. And unfortunately, even though we're continuing to invest in our system, the water loss continues to go up. And so we've decided to elevate this water loss effort to the level of a strategic initiative, which means we're devoting more resources and research towards this area in an effort to try to turn that trend around. Just as a reminder, there are a couple of different components of water loss. Most people, when they think of water loss, they think of major water main breaks, like it's shown in this top picture here. When that happens, it gets called in immediately. Our crews are out there very quickly. They valve down the line, make the repairs, and the water is back in service. So it's a very high flow event, but a short duration. What we found during our system-wide leak survey, however, is that most of our water loss occurs in situations like this, where basically you just have a dry pavement, nothing surfaces above ground, and it's actually escaping underground, either through caverns or sometimes into storm sewers, but there's no visible leak above ground. These can be very long in duration, even though they're low in flow. But what we found during our system-wide leak survey was that the volume of water lost through this type of leak is greater than that through what appears to be a more catastrophic situation at the top. When we did our water loss survey in 2010 and 2011, it gave us a very good snapshot of where we were at that point in time. It did confirm that the pipe that we had selected for replacement, the galvanized and cast iron, were the most in need of repair, and so that confirmed our Century 2 model. But it also identified the need for a more refined way of looking at leak detection. So what we did in our effort to address this more sufficiently is to model our leak detection methods after what we've done on our PACE 10. In PACE 10, we have different basins, geographic basins, like First Creek, Second Creek, and so on. And then we subdivided that using monitors to identify where the infiltration and inflow was coming. So based upon that, we were able to prioritize different mini basins and address rehabilitation that way. For the water system, it's divided up differently. It's more based upon elevation than it is geographical basins like the wastewater system is. There are some very small repump areas here. They're difficult to see on the map, but most of our repump areas are large. For instance, the main city repump area covers a very large area. And so when there's a main break on that, it doesn't really show up as well as it would if we had smaller defined areas. So what we plan on doing to address the water loss is to divide our repump areas into district metered areas, or DMAs. And we'll do that by installing meters that divide our larger repump areas into DMAs that have around 1,500 to 3,000 customers each. So this will help us when we look at basically the minimum nighttime flow between about 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. when there's very little customer use. And you can tell that there may be small background leakage in some areas and higher background leakage in others. And so that helps us differentiate between areas that we might not need to do leak detection on versus those we need to investigate further. So we plan on implementing these DMAs within the next year and a half. We hope to install the meters beginning this summer and continuing on through the end of 2016. The good thing about this approach is we're going to be able to collect data on each meter as it's installed. We don't have to wait for the entire system to be installed before we get data. The financial plan you'll see next month will include a line item for this, which amounts to about $1.8 million. But the cost of that is actually going to be offset, for the most part, by a reduction in our system-wide leak detection, which we won't be using that approach any further. So our pipe replacement programs support our KUB blueprint through the stewardship of our assets and our pipe replacement programs, and it also helps our reliability as well. Water loss programs will help to support our blueprint to support the conservation efforts. Anybody have any questions on that before I move on to the Cumberland Avenue part?
And I don't know why the water loss bothers you so much, but when you see numbers up in, like, we're losing a third, it just seems astronomical to me. I know water, we got plenty of water, so I mean, maybe it doesn't matter, but it bothers me.
Well, it does matter to us too, and that's why we've elevated that to a strategic initiative and really have developed this new program. I don't want to make any claims that it's going to turn things around immediately. Water loss is a difficult problem, and it takes a while for it to stop the increase, the rate of increase, and level off and then come back down.
Well, and that was going to lead to my question, two questions. One is, are there any government regulations that say that we have to cut it to a certain percentage? Did we talk about that at one time?
There were at one time. There was a state regulation several years ago. It lasted for about 4 years.
And then they just gave up on it?
Well, there's a different approach now. Now they're looking more at the cost to the utility for the water loss. And of course, the cost of our production is fairly low. So we're nowhere near the threshold for that.
Okay. And then the second thing is when we do this initiative, which I'm glad that we're doing, have we set any goals? Are we trying to say, well, we want to cut it in half by, our lifetime?
It's really too early to try to set any kind of goals like that.
Okay.
Within a year and a half, we have the system in place. I think we'll have a better idea of what we're dealing with.
But let me remind you, 4 or 5 years ago when we first started looking at this and the state got involved in trying to regulate it, there was a report that compared all the water utilities in the state. And when we came up, I think we were at 28% at that time or something. There were some water utilities that were above 60, 70% of water loss. So while we don't like this level of water loss, it's really by our peer benchmarking, we're nowhere near the top of utilities that are losing this kind of water. So it helps to put it in perspective, but it doesn't mean that we can't focus on it.
Okay. Next, we'll talk about the City of Knoxville project for the Cumberland Avenue streetscapes. And you all probably have heard this on the news in the last few days. This is a city initiative. They're leading the project. The city has already bid their roadway improvements here in the last couple of days. KUB is responsible for bidding utility replacements separately. We have actually already bid a small section of what we're calling our phase 1, and we're holding on to that contract until the city council approves their contract at the end of this month. As soon as that happens, then we'll approve our contract and we'll be start work. So the city's responsibilities include the overall project communication, of course, with input from KUB, and the city is actually going to hold a public meeting on April the 2nd. The scope of the project includes down at the new entrance to Publix at University Commons Way. It continues down Cumberland all the way almost to 16th Street. Our work is also going to include work on the side streets up to White Avenue to the north and Lake Avenue to the south as we do utility tie-ins on those roadways. Back in 2008, as part of our Critical Mains program, we decided we needed to replace the line going down Cumberland. It was a 1920s cast iron line, 16-inch, and it had passed its useful life. So at that time, we were aware that the city was thinking about a streetscapes project, and so we relocated that main. Instead of going down Cumberland, we relocated a block to the north down White. So when the city gets ready to do the streetscapes project, they don't have to contend with the 16-inch water line. Of course, there's still an 8-inch water line out there that needs to be replaced as part of this, that just has the services on it. Also, as part of that, in the last year or so, we've been relocating electric lines to the alleys. The line that went down Cumberland is now in the alley between Cumberland and White, and also in the alley between Cumberland and Lake Avenue. So when the city gets ready to start, as they go down the street, they can hook their connections onto these and abandon the old line here in the middle of Cumberland. So KUB has already invested and will continue to invest in the Cumberland Avenue project. The 16-inch water line on White Avenue is about $1.5 million. The electric facilities were about a net of $1 million to KUB. Our phase 1 relocation, which is kind of on the west end, is about $1 million. And then we have phase 2 relocations coming up that will bid towards the end of the month. The city is in charge of the traffic control for this project, and the way they plan on addressing the project is to generally close 2 lanes at a time. And they'll be starting with the north lanes. Both of those lanes will be closed, and the utility work will take place in those north lanes. Two-way traffic will be on the south lanes. In addition to that, there is an area near the intersection of Cumberland and University Commons Way that will be almost completely closed for about 6 weeks in June and July. There'll be one westbound lane that will be kept open in order to allow traffic to get to the interstate more easily. The city is going to be sending out the media advisories. Of course, we'll be giving them information so we can have one consistent message to the public. And from what we hear, most of the traffic is going to be encouraged to go along Daly Drive rather than going through Cumberland during this construction time period. The schedule, this month, the city, of course, received their bids for the roadway improvements just a few days ago, and that's subject to city council approval at the end of the month. Next month, we'll be ready to begin our construction at the intersection of Volunteer going to 22nd. And then in June, when the city closes that section down near the Publix entrance, we will be coordinating our work with the city and moving down to that location while they have that intersection closed. Then, after that, we'll be basically going down block by block, going from west to east over the period of about the next year or so. And we will finish with our work in July of 2016 up at the east end on 16th Street. At that point, the city will be turning around and they will close the south lanes and have two-way traffic going on the north lanes, and they will begin their streetscape work on the south side of Cumberland. So basically, we'll be finished in July of 2016, and they'll be finished a little over a year later in August of 2017. Any questions on that?
So this will be going on while the students is in school as well?
Yes, for a couple of years, actually.
Sure. I would just anticipate what it would do for business on that street. I mean, is there any way of knowing the percentage of how the business will be continue to operate in those areas there? Of course, we haven't got anything back from it yet for us.
There have been some meetings held with the businesses down there. The city held one, I think, about a week or so ago, and we were attending there as well. And so we're trying to get as much input from the businesses ahead of time so we know how to best address their needs down
And
there.
I'm sure with the advice of the public, it'll be, we'll probably some feedback from that too, I suppose, so.
The city has been working with the Cumberland Avenue Merchants Association for some time, and it's gotten, my understanding anyway, a lot of positive feedback on the project. Nobody's looking forward, I don't think, to the construction. They recognize that that's not going to be a good time necessarily for them. There will be difficulties. But I think they're looking forward to the improvements themselves and the meetings that the city's been holding and we've been attending. I think opens up some lines of communications that hopefully will help make things better for everybody during the construction process. And the public meeting coming up here in a few weeks will open it up beyond just the merchants to others who travel in the area, work in the area, who have concerns like the county.
We're gonna have a blog, too. The city will have a blog as well.
That's right.
Thank you, Julie.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm going to be giving you a brief update on the KUB Electric System. And I want to start by showing the electric system map. I know you're accustomed to seeing this map. The red lines indicate our transmission lines that connect our substations. The substations are shown in the black lettering with our in-feed substations in the red. Particularly, I want you to note the location of the Cherokee Trail substation, which I'll speak about in a moment, and also our East Knox substation in East Knox County. Through our Century 2 program, we've presented before in the past about the work that we do to upgrade our electric system. Comprising Century 2 are 4 sub-programs we monitor closely. One of them is our substation programs. We go through, we look at the substations through an analysis to see where we're having issues with our substations, the age. We come up with an engineering plan to make upgrades to those substations. We also look at where growth is being added onto our system. We want to make sure that we have adequate capacity to serve future load. So we also plan our substation work to make sure that we're well suited to do that. We have an overhead pole replacement program where we're replacing some of our aging poles, and also a program to replace our underground cable that's nearing the end of its useful life. You may recall we recently completed a major project in the downtown area that serves our, what we call the network, that serves pretty much the downtown Knoxville area. The downtown vault program was completed in 2014. That was an 8-year program that was the first step of some of our downtown network improvements, and I'll talk more about those in a moment as well. This is a picture of our Cherokee Trail substation. If you're not familiar with the location of this substation, it's on the Cherokee Farm property, or the old UT Ag campus property, just north of the University of Tennessee Hospital. This substation was built to serve the loads anticipated on the Cherokee Trail Research Campus. And it's also going to be a backup feed to the University of Tennessee Hospital. We're glad to say that this substation was energized earlier this week. So while there's still some work to be done on the exit circuits, the lines taking the power away from the substation, connecting into our existing system, the substation is in and ready to serve load shortly. We have a total capacity of about 100 MVA at that substation through 2 large transformers, and it costs about $7 million to construct this substation. Our East Knox substation is a little bit different type of substation. This one is a joint project that we have in conjunction with Tennessee Valley Authority, where we're co-located on the same property. At this location, KUB will install some large equipment to take power from TVA at 161,000 volts, and then this will be a transmission station feeding those red lines I showed in the first graph, where we feed our other substations. This substation will have a total capacity of 330 MVA. That includes the 2 large transformers like we have in this picture, one now and room for a spare in the future, and then another smaller transformer that we will serve the local area surrounding the East Knox substation. The total cost of this substation will be about $14 million. There's not a good picture to show that substation because it's in construction. Not a lot to show right now, but I did want to point out this large transformer that's being delivered. Just to give you a sense of the size of some of these equipment that we have to work with, this is a very large and heavy unit, and this is not even its full size. There's still some cooling fins and bushings that have to be added onto the transformer before it can be put into service. This particular unit we got from a manufacturer in Wisconsin. Every unit that we purchase and we spec, it's made custom to our specifications. So our engineering staff will travel to the plant to do the commissioning test to make sure that it meets our unique requirements. While this one came from a U.S. manufacturer, because that we put these units out for bid, we have had bids come in from companies located in Mexico, Brazil, even as far away as South Korea. So we're looking forward to having this substation in service complete in August, late this summer. KUB, we have a lot of poles on our system to transmit power from our substation to our end-use customers. About half of all those poles were installed in the 60s and 70s, and they're nearing the end of their useful life. You can see some facts here about our pole replacement program. We use primarily wooden poles for our distribution circuits. Those are the ones that might run down your neighborhood that serves power from the substations to our end-use customers. We do have another product that we're using in special cases, ductile iron poles. Those have a much longer life, about double the life of a wooden pole. They also cost about 5 times more than a wooden pole. But we found that that's a good choice to use in situations where we have our switches on those poles or underground risers that come up to make sure that that pole will serve our customers well for many years. Our transmission poles, a lot of those are being changed out in conjunction with some line upgrade projects that we have going on now. Those poles are typically the much larger, more expensive poles made out of steel. A lot of those are, excuse me, are engineered for that particular location as well. So a lot of work going on to replace and improve our infrastructure. This chart shows me just a little bit of work we can do each year. We replace about 2,600 poles a year. We've had this concerted effort underway for 4 years. And you can see we're well on our way to achieving our 10-year target of 26,000 poles. Right now, we're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is where we like to be. You never know when we're going to have weather delays or other projects to delay us, so we're on track with this important program. This is another chart of our electric system that shows some of the ongoing work that we have underway right now. Everything that you see in green is either a substation or an overhead line segment that's either have been constructed in the past few years or has recently been improved through our Century 2 program. You see some line segments in purple. These are some major lines that are being rebuilt right now. This particular line between our House Mountain substation and Luttrell is almost 180 poles to be set. So that's about a year-long project to rebuild that line. And then what you see in orange is the future work that's planned. One of the things you notice here is there's work spread out through the KUB system. That is purposeful. We have to be very mindful of the loading, that we have enough capacity in an area to serve the load and a backup. So that's why we choose our projects in the sequence that we do to make sure that we do have that adequate capacity. I mentioned that we have a underground cable replacement program underway. Years ago, back in probably the 70s and 80s, the trend in the electric industry was to install direct buried cable. That cable, the insulation is called cross-linked polyethylene or XLP insulation. What made that cable popular was the lower installation cost. You could just dig a trench and lay the cable right in the trench, or sometimes you could even use a machine to plow in the cable and pull it in. And that was great when we installed it. It saved a lot of resources then. But what we're seeing now is that we're seeing the life expectancy of that cable. We're seeing some failures of that cable, and this was primarily used in a lot of our underground residential neighborhoods. Also some of our commercial business parks, but most extensively in the neighborhoods. We currently have 64 miles of this cable on our system, and we have a program to replace this cable by 2020. This cable, although when we go into a neighborhood and we replace it, we typically do that by boring, so there's not a lot of destruction to the neighbor's properties, but you do have some destruction where you have to dig your boring pits, and because of the way this cable was put in, oftentimes when it fails, it goes without any forewarning. So when it fails, we often don't have a backfeed, and these customers can be out for several hours, perhaps days, while we get a crew in there to replace this cable. So that's why we want to get in and repair this cable before it causes a lot of issues for our customers. Some other examples of an underground cable replacement is the cable that we use in the downtown network. That's a specialized cable, paper insulated lead cable. It's a very good cable, been in service for many, many years, but we're starting to see some failures in that cable as well. And we're going through selectively removing and replacing some of that cable with the newer products. This chart shows some of the successes we've seen replacing with this XLP cable. Back in 2008, we had 140 failures on this type of cable. And by targeting the areas that had the highest failure rates, the first of our replacement project, we reduced that down to only 8 outages this past fiscal year. I mentioned earlier our downtown network project. The 8-year project that we began in 2006 was to go in and rehabilitate the vaults, what you don't see under the sidewalks that serve most of the high-rise buildings in the downtown area. When we started that project, it was a pretty comprehensive project. It took a lot of coordination between us and the city of Knoxville as we had to get into the roadways and set equipment up and work with the customers in the area. That project has gone really well, but there's more work to be done in the downtown network. One of the things that we're doing now is we're looking at our philosophy for how we serve some of these buildings. We had a system in place that we felt served our customers very well, but we found out recently that because of the age of some of the equipment, even though we had redundant sources of power, the customers might still experience some brief interruptions. By that I mean if you had 2 sources of power to a building to an automatic transfer switch, the customers would still see a 20 to 30 second outage before we could switch over to another circuit. And we recognized that that wasn't always providing the best service to the customer. So now we have a different service philosophy that should give completely uninterrupted service to our customers. We take on some more equipment that we have to install for the customer that's going to give them a much better level of service. We're actually going to be using that scheme on the new Residence Inn that's planned to be built on the site of the old News Sentinel. So that'll be the first application of that. Also, you hear us talk a lot about SCADA, using SCADA to control our electric system. Supervisory control and data acquisition is a way that we can monitor our system from our operations center to see the condition of equipment. In the past, we've done that with substations, but now we're moving to do that to some of our network equipment as well. So all of our new equipment that we spec has some equipment in it that allows us to be able to monitor and communicate with that equipment from the operations center. Right now, if we have a problem, if it's on a section of cable, we may not know about it until the customers call in and let us know that the power is out. With this new equipment, we can monitor and know we've got a problem beforehand. If there's a way then that we can route power around to restore the power to those customers, now we may have to send a crew down here to do some manual switching. In the future, we can do that from the operations center. So again, a time saver, and also it's a safety for the crews. They don't have to go down to the vaults to do that switching. Our investment in the downtown network is planned to be $1 million for the next 5 years. We're also going to be doing some other work on cable replacements, as I mentioned, with some of the old leaded cable, some equipment change outs, rehabilitation of our manholes, the things down below ground that get a lot of wear and tear just because of that wet environment that they're in. So overall, we're focusing on renewal and modernization of our entire electric system. By 2021, as I mentioned, we will replace 26,000 poles on the system, about 20% of all of our poles. All of that XLP cable will be removed from our system. 90% of our substations will be modernized. The bullet on the bottom, the communication infrastructure, that's a new system that we're putting in. It's going to take the place of our old copper system that we're using now. That's the system that we use for that SCADA control of our substations. We are broadening that system, going to a fiber optic system. That's going to take us from the dial-up age to the modern internet experience. We'll have a lot faster communication and be able to communicate with more equipment in the field when we get done with that project. speak a lot to our vegetation management program. You're familiar with the effort we went through several years ago with our Citizens Review Committee to enhance our vegetation management program. I will tell you that we're seeing great results from those changes that we made. We trim all of our circuits on a 3 to 4 year cycle. These heavy snows that we had of some of the recent storms in February, of course the first storm, an ice event where everything was laid and bent over with the ice, we did have several outages from the trees. But the following event, we had the heavy snowfall, we saw very few outages. And that's just evidence of how well our vegetation management program is working. We also have a focus on areas where we are not meeting the reliability expectations of our customers. Every year we go out and we analyze the data to see which parts of our system are experiencing a higher number of outages than we would anticipate. We did this several years ago with Lakemore Hills, a community in South Knoxville where they had a lot of outages and what they would call flicker. Just things happening where the power would go off, come back on, aggravating to them. We met with the neighborhood association and worked closely with them to try to figure out what was going on. The first thing we had to do was set some meters to help record those disturbances so we could see exactly what we were dealing with. We made several improvements to that community. We went through and we used some infrared equipment. It takes a thermal image of the lines and the equipment so we could see problems that were not visible to the human eye. We kind of did a good look over and we replaced anything that needed improving in that neighborhood. I think the biggest thing we did was a specialized vegetation management effort. While we had done adequate trimming on our conductors within our policy, the neighborhood recognized that there are a lot of large trees that are outside the right-of-way, trees that aren't in our trim zone, but if they fall would take out the power to a lot of customers. So we worked with that neighborhood association to work with those homeowners to get permission to remove, I believe it was several hundred of those hazard trees, put them on the ground before they damaged our system. And I think the community was really pleased with the work that we did to improve their reliability. So all these efforts together go toward our overall goal of increasing reliability for our customers. You're used to seeing this reliability chart. The target for this year is 2.15 hours of interruption for our customers. We're on track to meet that goal. We're very pleased with the results that we've gotten from all of our Century 2 work to help us achieve this increased reliability for our customers.
Is that pre-storm or post-storm? That last?
Well, this is excluding major storms.
Okay.
So we use an industry standard method that allows for whenever you have a storm, we take that data out of our chart. So we're just looking at the steady state, if you will. Yeah, this number would be higher if you did include the storms we had last July and the ones we had this February. Any other questions?
I wanted to ask a question. You talked about in-feed substations. Did I understand you to say that the definition of that would be a substation that distributes to other substations? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
An in-feed substation is where we receive power from TVA at their voltage. We step it down to our transmission voltage, and then we serve all of our other substations.
Okay.
The East Knox substation is kind of a 2-in-1. We're going to have that transformer there to feed the other substations. It's also going to have a transformer that will feed some of the local load right around the East Knoxville area as well.
Okay. So are those in-feed substations some of the earliest that we are modernizing and upgrading?
They are. We have plans. The Lonsdale in-feed substation is the one that you can see from the interstate near the Alcoa Highway. That's one of our older substations. We have some plans to work on that substation next year as well. These substations require constant maintenance, and even though they're some of our older ones, we've been replacing equipment, putting in new relays, putting in new structures throughout the years.
And Mike, how many in-feed versus regular substations do we have?
We have 8 in-feed substations and about 72 regular substations. The engineers and I always disagree on the number because I have to maintain the substations. I count the ones that serve like Roman Haas, and they don't necessarily count that. Any other questions? Thank you.
I don't want to jinx anything, but we hope this is our final winter storm presentation for the year. Last month you heard part 1 of Octavia, and Mike Boland's going to prepare us for part 2 and talk about the water breaks.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioners, last board meeting, we were at the tail end of an ice storm. I guess the Weather Channel named it Winter Storm Octavia. The storm came in on Monday. By Thursday, there were just a few customers that were still out. We were mopping up, if you will, that Thursday. I think there was a presentation that day on that storm. I wasn't here that morning. I went home and went to bed. Most people in this room played a role in that storm. And I want to follow up, talk a little bit more about that storm than what's happened since then. This is I guess the poster child picture for that particular storm. It received a lot of media attention. And it's a really dramatic picture, and it's one of those once-in-a-lifetime sort of deals where people take a snapshot of something where you've got a person working on a line up in an ice blade in the forest. And it's real pristine, it's real wow factor, it's really great. This is what I think about, though. This is a lot more closer to reality. This is people out working the ice. You can see it's raining. It's not really rain, that's ice coming down on them, and they're getting coated in ice. They're cutting up a big tree limb here that's across the road that they can't get through to the work site. You can see the road's covered with ice. A little later in that evening, you may recall, we had snow that came down on top of the ice. I mean, it was slick then, but once the snow got down there, it was really slick. In total, at the peak, we had about 21,000 customers out of service, but the total number of customers we restored was like 47,000 customers, because as the night went on, as the day went on, more and more trees fell. And so lines that we had put up, got knocked down again, or more lines came down later in the storm. So we restored a lot more customers than they were down during the peak. In total, there's about 72 hours worth of outages. And again, it's a testament to all of Kgb, because all Kgb rallies around in order to accomplish that sort of turnaround, that sort of restoration. We filled like 36,000 phone calls from customers during that period of time. Different areas of the company that would normally be doing something would be helping with the storm. And that encompasses most everybody in the room here. During the storm, we worked rotating 16-hour shifts. There was always people doing work. If you were stuck on the night shift, it was really bad, because that's where I was. And you know, you're out of your sleep rhythms and whatnot. But in any event, we were pretty successful with that. And again, that was a month ago today. When y'all were meeting, this was getting wrapped up. So here it is, February 16th, 19th, Octavia. I just talked about that. But what we haven't talked about is all the other storms we had. Okay, and that's what I want to talk about today a little bit. So we wrapped up on that Thursday, 19th. You may or may not recall, on Saturday, the 21st, there was another storm. As usual, we hear about these things ahead of time from the Weather Bureau. They have webinars that we participate in. We knew more storms were coming. We knew more work was going, and it didn't really matter how tired we were at that point. We had to get prepared once again. So starting that Friday night, we had crews held over from the normal 2 to 10 shift. They doubled over. We had more crews come in at 11 o'clock that night. We had more crews coming in at 4 a.m. that morning. By the time Saturday morning rolled around on the, I guess it'd be 21st, we had probably roughly 200 people over at Middlebrook Pike in anticipation getting ready for the storm. And the storm did happen. I mean, we had a big snow event, you may recall. And in fact, on the plateau, more than 90% of the people on the plateau were without power, some of them for up to a week. In our particular case, we did have snow, but as it turns out, that's all we got was snow. And thankfully, as Mike Patterson talked about, because of the tree trimming we've been doing and other improvements we've had, we had a total of 183 customers out. We had 200 people here. We had more people here than we had customers out. But that's a good thing, okay? And I was proud of that. Everybody was proud that we were prepared. We put the investment in time. We were ready, okay? So that was on Saturday. Well, then what happened? Well, I don't know if you recall or not, it's burned in my memory, but the next Tuesday morning, we all woke up and there was another snow, right? There was another like 4-inch snow that following Tuesday. Well, you know, everybody by then, school's been out, everybody's just staying home. We only had 23 customers out during that outage. We had, everybody here was ready to put people back in service as if it was going to be a 30,000 customer outage. But thankfully, we didn't have to do that. So that was on Tuesday. You may recall that again, we had another storm, and this one was a great snowstorm on the Thursday. 2 days later, we had another snow. On Thursday, it was a great snow. Depending where you were, you had 6 inches of snow. You get up the mountains, you had 12 inches of snow. Another great snowstorm, another great testament to our system. And I'll also tell you, we were just as prepared and just as ready with all the systems on go. If something happened, we were ready to rock and roll. We only had 23 customers out the whole time. So a concerted effort of us being prepared or responding, and also just storm after storm after storm, sort of like Lady Vols national championships, back to back to back to back. So one storm that's not on here was the 6th of March, which was a Friday. You may or may not recall, you probably don't, but storm came through Arkansas, tore up Arkansas, got to Memphis. Memphis had great big snow. Nashville, very, very big snow. Hit the plateau, went north of us, got Kentucky. All we got was rain. Well, we were over there, we were waiting, we were watching, all the crews were there. We were just waiting for something to happen. Saw a little bit of ice getting on the trees. Next thing you know, it was all rain. Okay, by that afternoon, we released all of our contract crews. They all headed up to Kentucky to help restore power up there. So that was a storm that really didn't happen. But for a period of almost 3 weeks there, I guess, we had one after another storm that we responded to or we were ready to. So far we've been talking a lot about electric stuff. What I want to talk a little bit more about today, eventually I'll get to, is talking about all the other stuff that happened here, besides all the electric restoration stuff. So at the same time all the storms were going on, it's capturing the headlines, there was also some really cold weather going on, you may or may not recall. And you know, there was even predictions for even colder weather. At one time, I'd seen some forecasts that was supposed to get to -10, you know, -12 degrees. I mean, some really significantly cold temperatures. It did get cold, thankfully not that cold. But when it gets cold, it causes issues for us. The first thing that happens is that we sell a lot of power, and we sell a lot of gas. And the systems are designed for that, but you know, that's the kind of condition that don't ever happen very often. So you don't really know what's going to happen until it happens. So, you know, I'll pick on the engineers a little bit. That's when the engineers show up. You know, whenever you're peeking out, the engineers show up and they say, okay, let me see what's happening here. I mean, is it really working the way I thought it was going to work? Or is our system loads really handled the way they're supposed to be handled? And we always learn things. You know, Bobby was over there. I see some people in the audience that was up there during those times, and he's never around except for the cold time. But they were there to look to see where we need to do things differently going forward, and we learned things. I'm proud to say we didn't have issues. The winter before, we had issues at the Dixie Substation service Foy Hill, you may recall. This time around, we found some things we needed to do, but we got through it. And hopefully over the course of this next year, we'll be making some more improvements in weakness areas. But that's one thing that happens. So it tests our capabilities. Now, eventually this shows up in customer bills, the cold weather does. You know, a soundbite if I was going to use is that February was really like January. You know, February was a colder month, and bills were higher in February than they were in January. So our winter, we had a late winter. That's what we had. Thankfully, March has turned out a little bit warmer for folks, but the bills were 5 to 6% higher, I think, in February overall than what they were in January. So we had a late winter this year. The other thing that cold weather does is it causes the ground to freeze. And when it freezes, then it thaws. And that freeze-thaw action in the ground causes the soil to move. When soil moves, that causes problems for us and our pipes in the ground, and it causes issues for customers' pipes as well. Speaking of customers' pipes, over the time frame, we'll talk about in a minute, the time frame, over that time frame, we had about 650 customer issues, water issues we responded to in a 4 or 5 day period there, where they either had no water, or they call and I got a leak going in my house, I need you to come out here right away and call my water because it's flooding my basement. So